Okay, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alina Vasquez, and I work for Human Services Research Institute. We are the organization that has been working with the department over the last couple of years to help build and develop the new budget model that will be rolling out shortly. I will be your main presenter today on a 2-hour training to walk through the new budget model and how it impacts adults using the self-direction program. I want to apologize. I'm actually having some construction done. So if my background noise gets too loud, please just say something in the chat. We've got backup presenters ready. So if you can't hear me, we'll switch to somebody else so that you can make sure you get all the information you need during our training today. So we're just going to start with a couple of training reminders. First and foremost, we want you to ask questions. The goal of this training is an opportunity for folks to get acquainted with the basic information about the new budget model. This is not going to be your only chance to hear this information and to get more information about the changes that are coming. This can feel like a lot of information, especially if it's not something that you've come across before or this is one of your first trainings about the new model. So do not worry if it feels like a lot. We're going to have lots of other chances for you to get this information. And we're doing trainings with all different kinds of stakeholders to make sure that you've got lots of different folks in your life who are going to be able to help get you the good information you need, including your support broker, your providers, etc. We will be pausing throughout the training today to let people ask questions. You can do that by raising your hand, and then we will take you off mute. You can also type any questions you have in the chat box at any time during the presentation. Because I'm sharing my full screen, I don't always see the chat questions right when they pop up, but we will be pausing quite a bit over the course of this training to make sure that people can get their questions answered. A copy of this training will also be made available on the My Choice Matters website, as will a recording of the training today. That way people can look at it later, or if there are people who you know who are also using the self-direction program who aren't able to make it, they can view a recording to get the same information. We also have a survey available that you can take after this training to let us know whether or not the information we shared with you was helpful and what additional kinds of information you might like to see about the new model. So the first thing we want to be clear about is that the new budget model is supposed to start as early as June 2022, so next month. The department is still waiting for approval that we need from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, or CMS, in order to start the new model. So while the department still hopes to start in June, it is possible we may be delayed further than that. As soon as the department knows for sure when things will move forward with the new model, they will be sharing that information on their website, through email, and on the My Choice Matters website. Today's training focuses on information around the new assessment tools, the new way that we're going to be setting budgets, and some of the new services that are available primarily on the traditional program. We will talk about all of this and then really try to focus our attention on how the new model impacts folks who self-direct their services. Before I start going into the material, I see one question pop up, so I want to make sure that we answer it. And that is, where will you be able to find the recording for this? That is a great question, Bonnie. Thank you for asking that. If you go to the My Choice Matters website, there is a new button available. I believe it says trainings. That may not be exact. If you click on that button, you will then see some additional sub items you can choose from. And Livia, could you perhaps, if you've got that up on your screen, could you talk folks through that process of where to find these materials on the My Choice Matters site?
Sure. The materials could be found under the Trainings and Information tab. And in that tab, if you click on Upcoming Trainings and Information, you'll be able to see all of the trainings that are going to be offered. And then if you click under Training Information, you'll be able to find the PowerPoints. And we have not uploaded any of the recordings just yet. Those are still being worked on. But that's where you'll be able to find that information as well.
Thanks so much, Livia. All right. So as folks are probably aware, there is a group known as Community Now. This is a group that consists of stakeholders, primarily people who use the program, as well as their family members, who have been asked to work with the department over the last few years to talk about what kinds of changes are needed in the adult DD program. That group was initially formed because of a need and a requirement under the KWV Armstrong Settlement Agreement to get additional stakeholder input. The Community Now group recommended a whole host of things, but specifically, they recommended that there be a flexible service model to support adults to meet their needs and explore a variety of interests in the community. They also asked that we include more pre-vocational, career planning, and individual supported employment within the array of services that people can use. And those two recommendations directly resulted in some changes that are happening at the same time as the new budget model is being implemented. So again, in response to some of the recommendations from Community Now, there have been a number of changes to services. The first is a big change to the way that supported living works on the traditional side. Right now, folks who use traditional services and use supported living get those services either hourly or on something known as high or intense. In the new model, high and intense are going away. Instead, people who use supported living on traditional will be able to get other kinds of services that they previously weren't allowed to get, including things like adult day health, developmental therapy, and one of the new services, community habilitation. These participants will also still have the ability to get all of their support from a supported living provider if that's the way that they want to get those services. But before, that was the only option if you were on high or intense supported living. And in the future, people will have more choice and more flexibility. The department is also adding 3 new services to traditional. The first is a pre-vocational services, which is intended to help people get general skills that can be helpful in looking for work. So the goal of that service is not to help people learn how to do a specific job, but how to get transferable skills that can be helpful in any job. Things like how to interact with your coworkers or how to get to work on time. Another new service, career planning, also available on traditional, was added based on the recommendations from Community Now as well. This service is focused on helping people think through what they would like to do with their career. This is a great service for folks who maybe are already working, but would like to maybe change their current job or want to think about how they want to progress in that job. It's also good for folks who aren't really sure what kind of a job they might like to seek, but want to think about what are their goals, what are their interests, and how can they plan to do the things they need to do to build a career. The third new service being added to traditional is community habilitation. That service is focused on helping folks engage in their community, doing things that meet their interests and help them build a better sense of community. This could be things like volunteering, going to a club, like if you really love knitting, finding and getting support to go to the knitting club in your local community to build a relationship with other people who also have that skill and want to do that thing is exactly what community habilitation is meant for. This is intended to help folks really get out of the community and do those things that are specifically of interest to them. Another big change to services is that a lot of the sublimits for services on traditional have been removed. This allows people more flexibility into how they use their services. The last big change to services in response to Community Now was trying to increase the access to non-medical transportation for folks who use traditional services. Right now, non-medical transportation is available on the waiver. Moving forward, this service will be available on the DD state plan. That means that more people will be able to use that service because there are some people who get services from the department who aren't eligible to receive the waiver, but instead only get state plan services. This slide is to help us all orient ourselves into how we're going to walk through, I apologize, how we're going to walk through the training here today. So There are key steps that exist for every adult who gets services from the Adult DD program. Every single year, adults who use the program have to get an assessment. Once you've done your assessment for the year, you will get a letter in the mail known as your budget notice. That tells you what services you're eligible to receive and how much of a budget the department has allotted for you to use those services. You then work with your support coordinator and your team to develop your plan. The plan is your SSP. Once that plan gets approved, you then can get your services for the year. Now, a lot of folks get the services that are in their SSP from the CSWs that they've selected, and they use those services all year. And then at the end of that period, they go back and get their assessment for the next year. Other people, however, may need to make changes during the year. They may want to change what kind of services they receive, or may need to get new CSWs. That step is also available in the new model. As we talk about how the new budget model is going to work, we're going to walk through each of these steps and describe how things are changing. There's one additional step that applies for folks who are applying for the program for the very first time. That is the application. There's only been one small change to the application to help get ready for the new model, but we want to start by showing you that so you're aware of all of the changes that are happening. So on this slide, you can see in this corner a snapshot of the new application for DD services. The slight change that's happening is right here pointed with the arrow. On the application, you're asked, what services are you seeking? And there are 3 different options you can choose from. You can say you're looking for DD services traditional, you're looking for DD services self-directed, or you can say that you're looking for state plan HCBS services. The big change is that now this box and the services that are listed have changed to include all of the services that are available on the state plan. That way, people who are applying for services know what services someone can get from the state plan. The application is what tells the independent assessment contractor, and the independent assessment contractor is Liberty, what kind of services you are hoping to get. It's really important that when folks fill out this application, they do so in a way that allows Liberty to know what kind of services you might want to receive. Because only people who apply for the DD waiver services can receive DD waiver services, even if they could have received or would qualify for additional services. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't change in the future and move to waiver services after the initial application. But what it does mean is that when you first fill out your application, it's important that you have a good understanding of what kinds of services you might want to receive. My guess is that all the folks on the call today are already receiving services and are past the application step. And again, you are not required to do a new application just because we're moving to a new model. So what are some of the differences between HCBS state plan only and DD waiver? For folks who receive HCBS state plan, there are 3 different reasons why somebody might only get that group of services. Again, those are services like developmental therapy, community habilitation, now non-medical transportation. Folks may only get those services because they don't meet the requirements to get the other services that are available on the waiver. There are different requirements to get services from the program as a whole than there are to get services from the waiver specifically. And some folks meet the requirements for the program, but don't meet the requirements for the waiver. Another reason why somebody might receive only state plan services is they didn't apply for waiver services. The only service they're hoping to get is maybe developmental therapy. If that's all that they would like to receive, and they only apply for those services, then that's what they would be eligible for. The third reason that someone might get HCBS state plan only services only is because they're getting services through another waiver, like Idaho's aged and disabled waiver. The federal rules say that people can only get one waiver at a time. So if someone is getting services from the aged and disabled waiver, they are not able to get DD waiver services, but they can still get those DD state plan services. Folks who get DD waiver services can get those services because they meet the requirements for something known as ICF ID eligibility. What that means is that they have needs that are such that they could receive services from an intermediate care facility for individuals with intellectual disabilities if they wanted to. In order to get waiver services, what you're saying is, I don't want to get services in an ICF ID. I want to waive those services and instead get services in the community with the DD waiver. People who are eligible for the DD waiver can also get HCBS state plan services in addition to the waiver services. So all of those services that are available to people who are on state plan are also available to people who are on the DD waiver. Once someone has been found eligible for the DD waiver, they can then select if they would like to get traditional services or self-directed services. The traditional DD waiver services allow a participant to pick an eligible provider who then will provide the services that they choose. Self-direction, on the other hand, allow participants to independently hire those community support workers or CSWs that they want to provide their services. As you guys are probably well aware, on self-direction, you have additional flexibility and choice in the services and supports that you receive, but there's also additional responsibilities because you are the person who is hiring and is the employer of those people who are offering your services. Next, we're going to talk about the first key step that happens for most participants each and every year, the assessments. Currently, you receive the SIB-R, and in the future, you'll be receiving 2 new assessments, the Vineland-3 and the Supports Intensity Scale. Before we dig into that more, I'm going to pause and see if there are questions from folks who are with us today.
We do not have any questions at this time, and I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, very good. So right now, the SIB-R is used to help identify if people are eligible for the DD program, if people are eligible for the DD waiver, and to help determine what budget they will receive. In the future, one tool will be used to help establish if people are eligible to get services and whether people are able to get waiver services. That is the Vineland-3. A second tool, the Supports Intensity Scale Adult, or Sysa, will be used to help determine people's budgets. We're going to talk about both of those tools in a little bit more detail right now. Oops, I fibbed a little bit. One other thing about assessments before we talk about a little more detail on the assessments. Because we are moving to a new model, the assessment schedule that you probably are used to is going to change for a little while. Usually, participants only get a full assessment every 3 years. Then, in the other 2 years, Liberty will do something called a focused review. A focused review is a shorter process where they just make sure that nothing major has changed in your life that would require you to need a whole new assessment. During the implementation of the Sysa and the Vineland-3, all participants will get a full assessment in the course of a little over a year. That's because folks need to have both the Vineland-3 and the Sysa on file in order to get into the new budget model. However, it takes a lot more time, both for the participant and their families and other people who respond to the assessments, and for Liberty, who provides the assessments, to do the full assessment than it takes to do a focused review. As a result, the department is going to need to change the schedule and get back to a place where only 1/3 of participants get a full assessment each year. In order to do that, the department will be dividing all of the current participants into 3 groups: Group A, Group B, and Group C. Participants in all of those groups are going to receive that full Vineland-3 and Sysa during the implementation year. Then, folks who are in Group A will get another full SIS-A and Vineland 3 in the following year. Then they'll get a focused review for 2 years before they get their next full assessment in 2026 to 2027. Participants in Group B will also get that full assessment during implementation. Then they'll get a focus review in the following year. The next year, which is 2024 to 2025, they'll receive another full assessment with the 2 new tools. Then they'll get 2 years of focus reviews before getting their full assessment. Participants who are assigned to Group C will be on a more or less a regular schedule. They will start by getting a full assessment with the 2 new tools during the implementation year. They'll then have 2 years of focus reviews before getting their next full assessment. Once that process has been completed, 1/3 of participants will get a full assessment each year, and 2/3 will simply be getting that focused review instead. However, if you have a change in condition, meaning that your needs change quite a bit at some point during that process, you will be able to get a full assessment as soon as it is needed by requesting it, and we'll talk about that process later in the presentation. New participants, so people who are entering the program for the first time, will receive a full assessment based on the regular schedule, just dependent on when they enter the program. Participants will be divided into groups A, B, and C at random, except that any individuals who volunteer to take part in a practice SIS-A in the last few months to help the assessors finish their training requirements will be automatically placed in Group C. This was done because we know that you just sat through a SIS-A and will need to do another one during implementation. So that will mean that it will be 2 additional years until you'll need to do another SIS-A and Vineland 3. Participants will be informed of which group they are in around the time of their first SIS-A and Vineland 3 assessment. Now let's talk a little bit more about these new assessments. So the supports intensity scale, again, is the assessment that helps to determine your support level, which will then determine your budget. The questions on the SIS-A are about the kind of support that you need in your home, in your community, with learning, employment, to maintain your health and safety, engage in social activities, and some questions about your medical and behavioral needs. The Vineland 3 is used to help determine your eligibility for the DD waiver and for the program as a whole. That tool asks questions about your skills and your needs in the areas of communication, daily living, socialization, motor skills, and maladaptive behaviors. So in order to be eligible for the DD program, and everyone who is eligible for the DD program can then receive those state plan services, you need to meet 3 requirements. The first is you have to be 18 years or older. The second requirement is that you must have a qualifying diagnosis that was made before the age of 22. The kinds of diagnoses that work include a diagnosis of an intellectual disability, autism, cerebral palsy, epilepsy, or other closely related conditions. The third piece of the criteria, and this is the piece that is measured with the help of the Vineland 3, is that an individual must have a substantial limitation in at least 3 major life activities. Major life activities, for the purposes of this criteria, are things like self-care, receptive and expressive language, learning, mobility, self-direction, capacity for independent living, and economic self-sufficiency. Again, in order to be eligible for the program, you must have a substantial limitation in 3 of these 7 areas. There are specific scores on the Vineland 3 that will let the department know if you have a substantial limitation in any of these areas. The scores that are used vary from area to area, but so long as you're 18 years or older, have a qualifying diagnosis, and have a substantial limitation in at least 3 of these areas, you will be found eligible for the program. So the next step of eligibility is whether or not you're eligible for waiver services. Again, in order to get waiver services, you need to have applied for the waiver and you need to meet ICF ID level of care. Individuals are eligible for the waiver if they have met all of the DD program eligibility requirements we just talked about, if they require something known as active treatment, and if they meet one of either the functional, behavioral, or medical requirements necessary to show that they would qualify to receive care in an intermediate care facility for people with intellectual disabilities. It's measured about whether or not somebody meets the functional or behavioral criteria using the Vineland-3. Again, someone who meets DD waiver eligibility can get any of the services the program offers, and they can select if they'd like to receive those services using traditional or if they would like to self-direct those services. So how do we get to a support level using the Sysa? There are only specific portions of the Sysa that we use to assign people to levels. That is to measure someone's general support need, and there are 3 levels based on folks' general support need: level 1, level 2, and level 3. Section 1 of the SIS, as well as something known as the supplemental questions, are asked during the Sysa to get more information about someone's extraordinary medical or behavioral support needs. There are 2 specific levels for individuals who have extraordinary medical needs, level M, or individuals who have extraordinary behavioral needs, level B. You get into that level through a process known as verification, which we'll talk about in a minute, but the information that is collected during the SIS assessment also helps to decide if someone will be entered into one of those levels. So one of the questions we've heard a fair bit is, why does somebody need to complete the entire SIS assessment if the department only uses certain parts of the assessment to determine budgets? The reason is that the entire assessment will be helpful in giving the person-centered planning team a better understanding of the person's support needs and help everybody to develop their service plan. Another part of the reason is that as we are implementing the new model, the department will also be evaluating as we go. There is the possibility that in the future, even more of the assessment could be used to help place people into levels. So it's important that we have all of the information from all of the assessment so we can keep making sure that the new model is working as it's supposed to and working as best as it possibly can. This slide shows you the criteria to enter each of the 3 levels for general support. Level 1, which is for folks who have relatively low general support needs. Level 2, for folks with moderate general support needs. And level 3, for folks with high general support needs. There's also level M, as we discussed, for people with extraordinary medical support needs. And people who have any different kind of general support needs could fall into that level based on their medical needs. There's also level B for individuals who have extraordinary behavioral support needs. And again, people might have general support needs that are low, moderate, or high, but because of their extraordinary behavioral needs, they will be placed into level B. Each participant is only assigned to one support level. Levels 1, 2, and 3 are based on scores on the Sysa. Specifically, Section 2A around home living, 2B around community living, and 2E around health and safety. The standard sum scores of those 3 sections, which we sometimes call the ABE score, is what determines which level you would be assigned to based on your general support needs. Levels M and B are assigned based on verified need, which we'll talk about next. Another thing to remember is that somebody who qualifies for more than one level is still only going to be assigned to one level. So if I had an ABE score of 29 and I had a verified medical risk that met the criteria for level M, I would technically meet the criteria for both level 2 with a score of 29 and level M. But I would only be assigned to level M because you were assigned to the level of the greatest need when you meet multiple criteria. Someone who meets the criteria for levels M and B will be assigned to the level for their greatest support need, either medical or behavioral. It's the verification team, which we'll talk about more in a minute, who will determine which of those levels is your greatest area of support need. Before I continue, I want to pause and see if we have any questions come up, and then we'll talk a little bit more about levels M and B.
I am not seeing any questions at this time or any hands raised.
We do have
Okay.
one question. I'm putting it in the chat box now.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Will the care coordinators be educated enough to suggest traditional or self-direction? I'm assuming that's talking about the support brokers. We do have trainings available for both support brokers and service coordinators, but really the decision is up to the participant and their team to decide what services would be best for that participant.
Thanks, Livia.
And those are all of the questions that we have.
Okay, then let's talk a little bit more about levels M and level B. So what is the process for being assigned to levels M or B? Someone can be flagged for levels M or B, or can enter those levels by requesting levels M or B. We'll talk about flagging in a minute, but really all that means is that someone's responses to the supplemental questions and Section 1 of the Sysa indicated that it seems likely that they may meet the criteria for level M or B. Once someone has requested assignment to level M or B, they will need to complete and send in something known as the verification questionnaire, which we'll show you here in a moment. They'll also need to send in supporting documentation explaining their medical or behavioral support needs. Once their medical or behavioral support need has been verified to meet the requirements, they can then be assigned to levels M or B. This process is intended to be pretty similar to the process that's currently required for individuals who are seeking intense supported living. The main difference is that the process of verification for levels M or B is available to all participants, no matter where they choose to live or what kind of services they choose to receive. In order to be assigned to level M, you must have an extraordinary need for medical support. This means that someone has a chronic or acute medical condition that is so complex or unstable that they require one-to-one staffing to provide frequent intervention and frequent monitoring. Someone who has that level of medical support need and can provide supporting documentation about that need can be assigned to level M. In order to be assigned to level B, an individual must have an extraordinary need for behavioral support. This can mean that someone has had a recent felony conviction or charges for offenses related to serious injury or harm of another person. They have a history of predatory sexual offenses and are at a high risk to reoffend, or they have a documented sustained history of serious aggressive behavior, which shows a pattern of causing harm to themselves or others. Any person who meets the criteria for level B and has an extraordinary need for behavioral support must also require one-to-one staffing for at least 16 hours a day around that behavior or that risk. Individuals can be flagged as maybe meeting the criteria for level M or B based on their responses to Section 1 of the supplemental and the supplemental questions. If somebody is not flagged for levels M or B, they will still have the opportunity to request level M or B. During your assessment, the assessor will ask if you would like to go through verification. You can answer, yes, I would like to seek verification. No, I would not like to seek verification. Or I only want to go through verification if I am flagged. Any individual who requests verification will be able to go through that process. If you want to go through verification, you'll need to complete this verification questionnaire. This questionnaire is new with the implementation of the new model, and you will receive this questionnaire via email. You can also receive it on the department website, and Liberty will send you a copy if you request the verification review. Anyone who does not request verification will be assigned to levels 1, 2, or 3 based on their answers to the Sysa. In order to complete this questionnaire, you'll simply need to input the participant's name, who's responding to the questionnaire, the date it was submitted, and then a way to contact the person who's responding. The questionnaire is then divided into a number of different sections, and you'll only need to complete the section that is for the type of need that you're seeking verification for. So for example, if I was seeking verification because of my medical needs, I would only need to complete the section on extraordinary medical level of support. There are other sections of the questionnaire specific to behavior needs that I could leave blank because that was not the type of verification that I was seeking. The form also includes, at the bottom of each section, a list of the kind of supporting documentation that you should submit along with the questionnaire for review by the verification review team. This slide also provides some examples of the kinds of documentation that should be submitted with your verification request. If you're seeking verification for level M, the kinds of documentation that might be helpful include things like primary care notes, your history and physical, emergency room reports, detailed seizure logs, nursing plans, and hospital discharge summaries. If someone is seeking level B for their extraordinary behavioral support needs, things that would be important to include things like court orders or other legal documents that detail probation, parole, convictions, or pending charges, a sexual risk assessment that's been completed within the last 3 years by a qualified person, incident reports, behavior management data, and police reports. So who completes these verifications? That is the Verification Review Team, or VRT. The Verification Review Team includes representatives from the Bureau of DD Services, the Crisis Prevention Team, and the Independent Assessment Provider, so Liberty. The verification team will meet and review the verification questionnaire that you submit, any supporting documents that you provide, and any records that the department already has that are relevant to knowing whether or not you meet the requirements for levels M or B. The eligibility and budget notice that you receive will include the verification review team's decision, why they made that decision, and a list of all the documents that they looked at. You do have the right to appeal any decisions that are made by the verification review team if you disagree. We're going to pause again here for questions.
We have a couple of questions that have come in. Would a certified family home with one person need to do this? I think they're referring to the Sysa assessment.
So every person who is moving into the new model will need to complete the Sysa if they want to stay in the adult ED program. And if a person who is in a certified family home with just one person, if that person has extraordinary medical needs or extraordinary behavioral needs, as described on the slides previously, then it would make sense to go ahead and, yes, request that verification process and submit that documentation.
Will the Sysa assessment stop if you request verification until the form is received?
The Sysa process will continue, so you will complete the entire Sysa but you will not receive your budget and eligibility notice until the verification review team has had a chance to meet and review your documentation. So participants will have, or respondents will have 14 days from the date of the assessment to complete the verification questionnaire and send it in along with any supporting documentation. Once that information is received, the verification review team will meet and review the documents and determine whether or not the participant has an extraordinary medical or an extraordinary behavioral support need. If they do, then they will be approved for levels M or B, and the notice will indicate what level they were approved for, and all notices will identify exactly what the reason is for the verification review team's decision. So if you request verification review and submit your documentation, and when you receive your eligibility and budget notice, you are assigned to levels 1, 2, or 3, that means that you were not found eligible for levels M or B. And a little further down your notice, it will tell you exactly why the verification review team made that decision.
Thank you. Can you be assigned to both levels M and B?
Somebody can meet the criteria for both level M and B, but they will only be assigned to one level. The level they will be assigned to is the area that is the area of their greatest need, or the primary driver of their support need. The verification review team will identify if you meet the criteria for both, which level you'll be assigned to, and your notice will explain that you met the criteria for both M and B, and this is the reason why you were assigned to either level M or level B.
Okay. Does medical need include psychiatric needs if the participant takes psych meds?
So as a reminder, I'm going to slip this back to a couple of slides. Someone can meet the need for extraordinary medical support if they have a chronic or acute medical condition that is so complex or unstable that they require one-to-one staffing for frequent intervention and frequent monitoring. So if they have a chronic or acute medical condition that requires that level of support, then they can be assigned to level M. Often individuals who are assigned to level M include people who may need regular turning and movement, folks who may be at a choking risk and may have breathing tubes, things of that nature is typically what we see for folks who are assigned to levels M. We also often see folks assigned to level M for folks who have very hard to predict seizure activity. So they may have uncontrolled seizures and need to be monitored at all times to make sure they are safe.
Okay. When will Liberty Health start using this new system?
So the exact date that Liberty Health will start doing the new assessments using the Vineland 3 and the Sysa has not been finalized yet. We anticipated that that was going to begin on June 1st. However, the department is still in conversation with the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, to get the application for their waivers approved. You only can make changes to your program once you get approval from CMS. And since that approval has not come yet, the department has told Liberty to pause on starting the new assessments, and we're not going to start on June 1st, but a little bit later, dependent on when that approval comes in. So the specific date is not yet determined, but as soon as the department knows, they will be sure to inform everyone. And when Liberty is contacting individuals to set up their assessments, they will let you know if you're setting up to do a SIB-R under the old system, or if they've started moving to the new system with the 2 new assessments.
Okay. Thank you, Alina. We do have a hand raised. Deb, if you could please unmute Miranda.
One moment. There you go, Miranda.
Hello? Hello? Hello?
Go ahead, Miranda. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Yeah, I think you kind of answered my question, but so we don't, if we just, because I just recently did the SIB-R, well, I guess it wasn't recent, probably in, I think it was January. So then I just wait for a notification if I need to update stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So folks will roll into the new system based on their normal recertification date. So if
Okay.
you normally do that in January, then it'll be January of next year when it'll be time for you to do the SIB-R and the Vineland 3.
Okay. And then, so they'll let me know though if I need to do any of those new assessments that you're talking about.
Yes, when they contact you to schedule your assessments, they'll let you know which assessments you're doing.
Okay. I just didn't want to have to like try to figure out what I was supposed to do. So they're going to contact me.
They will
Okay.
contact you and let you know what you're supposed to do. Absolutely.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. And we have another hand raised. Deb, if you could unmute Jody.
Mom.
What?
Mom's asking.
Okay. You're okay. We have 10 minutes. No lying. 10 minutes.
Miranda, can you please mute your line?
Yeah.
Okay, and here's Jody.
Hello. I had a question. Can you address, I think it was sort of brought up in a previous question, but it seems to me like there's a gap in the program for those participants who have a severe intellectual disability and a mental health diagnosis that requires one-on-one monitoring, but it doesn't include turning them or physical medical conditions, and they don't have a recent felony. Can you address this issue?
So for individuals who need constant monitoring and support, specifically one-on-one monitoring and support, due to perhaps the potential of harming themselves or harming other people, can be eligible for level B. There is not a requirement that you have been connected with the criminal justice system for level B. If you have a history of harm to yourself or others, and you need one-on-one support for at least 16 hours a day to monitor and make sure that does not become an issue in the future, then that would also qualify for level B for behavior. There are also individuals who can receive 24 hours of support, just not on that one-on-one basis, based on their general support needs as well.
Okay, thank you.
And those are all of the questions we have at this time.
Okay, I am going to give us just a short 5-minute break before we continue moving on and we talk about the next piece, which is how to select your service mix. So why don't we plan to reconvene at either 1:54 or 2:54, depending on your time zone. All right. We've now talked through the whole process of someone getting their support level. And your support level can be 1, 2, 3, M or B. The next step in the process is someone's service mix. So a service mix is simply the term that we use to group participants based on the way that they choose to get their services. This could be the difference between folks who choose traditional or self-direction and the type of in-home habilitation support that they would like to receive. Participants have the right to change their service mix at any time with only one small exception. That is, individuals who are assigned to the state plan HCBS only service mix are only able to change out of that service mix if they are eligible to receive the DD waiver. Because that service mix is specific to folks who cannot access waiver services, it's only by being eligible for the waiver that you can then change to a different service mix. Participants who are on self-direction right now are, by definition, eligible for the waiver. Therefore, there are 3 different self-direction service mixes that might apply. The first is SD live-in support. This is for participants who receive in-home habilitation from a CSW that they live with. The second is SD community-only supports. That is for those participants who choose to receive no in-home habilitation. The third service mix is SD outside supports. This is for those participants who receive their in-home habilitation from CSWs that they do not live with. Because the idea of a service mix is somewhat new, the department made this decision tree to help participants figure out which service mix applies. The assessor will help walk through with the respondents these questions to see which service mix applies for your situation. The first question you'll be asked is, do you receive paid supports in your home? If you don't choose to receive any paid supports in your home, then the service mix that applies is self-directed community-only supports. If you do receive paid supports in your home, then you'll go to the next question. That question is, does the person or persons providing your in-home paid supports live in your home? If no one providing your in-home paid supports lives with you, then you would receive the self-directed outside support service mix. If any of the people who are providing your in-home paid supports do live with you, then you would receive the self-directed live-in supports. Now, there are some individuals who may receive their in-home supports from multiple people, some CSWs that live with them, and some CSWs who don't live with them. In that circumstance, someone would answer yes, because at least one of the people who provide your in-home supports live in your home. And so it is the self-directed live-in support service mix that applies. So once you know someone's level and their service mix, you have all of the pieces you need to get to their budget. Each support level and service mix combination has its own thing called a model mix. The model mix is just the way that the department figures out what budget you will be assigned. In the new model, there are also ways that you can get services beyond your assigned budget. That includes the ability to get a health or a safety service, the ability to get an employment-related service, or the ability to submit a budget modification request due to health or safety reasons. We're going to talk about all the different kinds of budget modifications in a little bit, but just know that the budget that you see on your budget notice is not a limit into the amount of dollars you have available or the amount of supports that you can get, but really just a starting place. So to get into the budgets, we're going to take a couple of steps. The first is I'm going to explain the 3 parts of the traditional budget and which traditional services fit into each part of that budget. We're going to start there because the self-directed budgets are based on traditional budgets. However, there are some differences. So once we explain the basics of the traditional model mixes will tell you exactly what's different about the self-directed budgets. Then we're going to explain exactly how the model mixes work and show you some examples of traditional model mix and then how that translates or relates to the self-directed mixes. Then the last step is we'll get into more detail about all those services you can get in addition to or outside of the new budget. So again, step one, let's explain the budget components on traditional, and then we'll talk about how that is and isn't different than the budget on self-direction. So on traditional, the budget is broken into three components: the residential supports component, the discretionary supports component, and the planning supports component. By and large, the limits on the budget are that you can use any of the dollars in each of the components for just that kind of support. So I can use any of my discretionary support dollars to purchase any of the discretionary supports that I would like, but I can't use my discretionary dollars to buy more planning supports. There are some exceptions to that, but that's the basic rule for traditional. You add together these three components and that gets you to your budget. Just as like on self-direction, there are also the ability to get services and supports in addition to that budget, and we'll show you that next. So again, this slide is still talking about traditional, but what this shows you is what traditional services fit into each of the different components of the budget. So in the residential habilitation component of the budget, someone can choose to receive certified family home services or supported living services. In the discretionary supports section of the budget on traditional, someone can choose between this whole list of services: adult day health, developmental therapy, the 3 new services, transportation, respite and chore service for folks who are choosing to receive no in-home habilitation, and then supported living services, because folks who choose supported living services still have the ability to get that 24 hours of support if they would like. In traditional, there's also that service coordination and planning component, which just offers someone's service coordination service and the plan support. As I already talked about, there are this special list of services that are called health, safety, or employment services. These are the services that someone can get without using any of their budget dollars by simply meeting the criteria for that specific service. Those include things like skilled nursing, specialized medical equipment, environmental adaptations, home delivered meals, and the like. So that is how the budget components work on traditional. Now let's talk about self-direction. On self-direction, there are not different budget components. An individual can use their budget dollars flexibly to purchase their residential supports or their in-home supports, their discretionary supports or the supports they get in their community, and any of their planning supports, like the support you receive from a support broker. Also on self-direction, you can still get those health, safety, or employment services in addition to your budget. This slide shows what different kinds of self-direction supports fall into which category of the budget. So most supports, like your personal support, learning support, emotional support, relationship support, and transportation support, fall into the budget. So too does your support broker services, and then any services from your fiscal employer agent. That's who helps monitor the payment for your employees. The services that can happen and are added outside of the budget are any job support services, when you're using job support services for competitive integrated employment, adaptive equipment, and specialized nursing services. So the model mix is used to help decide and get to the budget. The department made model mixes by first deciding the type and amount of service they thought that most people would need based on their service mix and support level. The department then figured out how much it would cost by using the rate for that service and multiplying the rate by the amount of units of that service they wanted to make available for someone over the course of a year. They did that for all the different services that are available and then added those amounts together to get to the total budget. But participants are not required to use the specific services that are included in the model mix. Instead, participants can use the dollars from the model mix flexibly to buy the services that best fit their goals and needs. The other benefit of model mixes is that they can be changed whenever the department needs to. For example, the model mixes were recently changed already because some of the services on traditional had rate changes that were approved by the legislature. The model mix for traditional was then adjusted to take into account the new rates, and as a result, the total budgets increased because the new rates were higher than the previous rates. Again, the model mix only explains how the department set the budget based on the way that someone wanted to get their in-home supports and their level of support need. People do not have to use the services that are in the model mix. People can choose the type of residential support and discretionary services that they want to include in their plan and can get those other services for health, safety, or employment in addition to their budget. So adults who self-direct their budgets get a model mix that is based on the model mix that was developed for adults who use traditional services. This is because the traditional service array has a set cost or a set rate for the different services that are in play. And there are very clear service definitions for all the different kinds of services that someone might want to utilize. However, there were some differences between the services and the mixes that are available on traditional and those on self-direction. So, for somebody who receives the community-only mix on, or the self-directed community-only supports mix, their model mix or budget is based on the community-only model mix for traditional. However, because folks who use self-directed supports also need to pay for their fiscal employer agent, additional dollars were added to the budget to cover the cost of that service. Individuals who select the self-directed live-in support service mix get a budget that is based on the certified family home model mix on traditional, but they too get dollars added to cover the cost of the FEA. Individuals who get the self-directed outside supports service mix have a model mix that is based on supported living services. However, some portion of the cost associated with running a supported living agency were removed from the calculation, and the cost of FEA was added to get to that budget for self-direction. The next step in the process is we're going to walk through some examples of model mixes. I'm going to show you the traditional mix first, and then explain how it translates to the self-directed mix. I saw a couple of questions pop in. I see one person who's not able to see the slides. I apologize for that. They will be posted on the My Choice Matters website very shortly. I would change how they are being shared, but I unfortunately do not know how to do that. I am sorry, John. I also see a question that asks, what areas does counseling, peer support, and CBRS fall into? Typically, counseling services would be paid for with someone's medical card, so would not come out of their adult DD program services. And I would need a little more information about what peer support and CBRS services are in order to answer that, unless Livia or Cindy, you guys know offhand where those would fall.
CBRS are mental health services, and those would also come out of the Medicaid card. However, if there was a need for participants to add them to their self-direction budget, if the provider was not a Medicaid provider, then that could be looked at, and that would fall under the emotional support category. But
Thank you,
typically,
Olivia.
those services do come out of the participant's Medicaid card and not from the self-directed budget.
Thanks so much. All right, so again, those are the only questions I see at the moment. So the next slide I'm going to show you is the model mix for traditional certified family home. Again, that is the basis for the self-directed live-in supports service mix or model mix. I will apologize that the print on this is pretty small to make it fit onto a slide. However, on the My Choice Matters website, under the Training and Information tab, there is a document that has all of the model mixes for both traditional and self-direction. You can get that off the My Choice Matters website and then make it as big as you would like on your computer screen if this is a little bit hard to read. I'm going to start by just quickly orienting you to the basic construction of the mix, and then we'll get into a more specific example to try to make it a little bit bigger on your screens. So again, this is the traditional certified family home mix. Some things to know, because this is true about all of the mixes. Going from left to right, we have the different support levels. Support level 1, 2, 3, M, and B. Down the left-hand side, we have the different budget components. We start with the residential component, then the discretionary component, then the planning component, and then finally the total budget. Again, remember, while there are 3 different components on traditional, those components can be used flexibly and are combined on self-direction. The next column shows you the specific service, so the name of the service that's included in the model mix. The following column provides you the reimbursement rate. It shows you both the rate at the 15-minute unit, since that is the billing unit, but then also shows you the rate at the hour basis. Within each of the mixes, for each service, it tells you how many hours per week were added to the mix for each service. I'm going to jump to the next slide so you guys can see it a little bit bigger. So here is just level 1 discretionary services for, again, that traditional certified family home mix. Here's all of the services that are included in the model mix, the rate for those services, and then the number of hours per week. The discretionary portion of the budget was calculated using a 50-week year. That is because often for these kinds of services, individuals may not use that service at all times. They may go on vacation, it may be closed for holidays, etc. And so that is a pretty typical construction to use a 50-week year. We do know there are 52 weeks in a year, and 52 weeks or 365 days were added and included for all of the residential portions of the budget. So for the first service, Adult Day Health, 4 hours per week were included. That's out of a 50-week year. So that means that there are 200 hours that are added to the budget for that service. 200 hours at a cost of $11.16 per hour equals $2,232 added to the budget. Again, an individual who's on the traditional certified family home mix does not have to use this service at all. They could use way more than 4 hours per week. This simply is how we add this value to the budget. We do the same process for each of the discretionary services, adding up all of the dollar values in this column to get to the subtotal of $27,955.40 that are added for the discretionary portions of the budget. So this slide shows you the 3 different components of the budget on traditional certified family home. We already talked about how we got to the discretionary total, that $27,955. The rate for certified family home on traditional is $53.39 per day. And for every day of the year, the total being added to the budget to cover that service is $19,487.35. We then add the planning portion of the budget, which includes plan development and service coordination, to add an additional just under $3,200 to the budget to get to the total budget for traditional certified family home between these three components of $50,634.51. So that is how we get to a budget for level 1 on traditional for certified family home. Now let's do a side-by-side comparison with self-direction. So again, the self-directed service mix for individuals who are using live-in supports is what is based on that CFH on traditional mix. So on traditional, you see we added just about $19,500 for residential. That amount gets added to the self-direction budget. We included that $27,955.40 for the discretionary budget. That too gets plugged right in on self-direct. $3,191.76 were added from the planning budget. That also gets added in self-direction. But added on top of that is the cost of the FEA service of $108 per month. So an additional $1,296 was added to the budget. When you add together all of these components, the total budget available for someone in live-in self-directed supports at level 1 is $51,930.51. Again, on self-direction, you're not limited to each of the subcomponents of the budget. This is just one total dollar value that you can utilize to purchase your services. The next slide shows you the full mix for SD live-in supports. So we just went through in detail level 1, but the same applies for level 2, 3, M, and B. It is based on that CFH traditional component, but the additional cost of FEA was added, and there is additional flexibility to use these dollars to purchase those self-directed supports that you see fit. I've got a couple more examples of other model mixes, but I'm going to go through those pretty quick so we get through the rest of the content. So I'm going to pause and answer any questions before we quickly walk through the other model mixes, and I'll just highlight some things that I think you'll want to take note of. Okay, let's see. One question that has come up is, what service mix qualifies for non-medical transport in a certified family home? So non-medical transportation is added to the traditional budget for all service mixes. Someone can utilize that service to move to or from other paid services or to access activities in the community where they are not supported. Individuals on traditional are not limited to the amount that was included in the budget for that, which is a number of miles per year versus some other amount, but it's simply the amount that was added to the budget for that purpose.
Thank you, Alina. We have a few more questions. If the participant uses both live-in and outside supports and the budget is based on certified family home rates, how is the budget figured?
So if someone is receiving supports from someone who lives in their home and that person is providing supports in their home, then this is the model mix that would apply for that individual. And yes, the basis for the residential component of the budget is based on the CFH on traditional. However, individuals are able to request additional dollars on the basis of health or safety if they need more to cover their amount of supports. And I know that the department is currently looking at the way that it pays certified family home providers on traditional and looking at potentially adjusting that rate in the near future. If that were the case, then the model mixes would be adjusted accordingly, as would then the model mixes on self-direction, which come out of those traditional.
Okay. The service mix includes 2016 for travel. Does travel need to be itemized in the plan, or is it just available? Travel does need to be itemized on the plan, so make sure that if you are requesting mileage that you include the travel on the plan. Next question, are those amounts the actual range of budgets everyone will get?
So this is the range of budgets for folks who are in the SD live-in supports based on their support level. We will go through the budgets for the other two service mixes next.
Okay. My participant wanted to know what the name of the non-medical service is called. He used to get Uber cards to help with his desire to attend the church farther away or to go to events at BSU. So we don't have a specific transportation provider. This would be if CSWs want to provide the transportation. We also have bus passes that are available. So it's whatever the participant selects. We have another question about transportation. Is non-medical transportation just gas mileage reimbursement through MTM? It is not through our medical contractor, MTM. That is for medical transportation. This is for non-medical transportation, so participants could go out in the community and be able to work on their goals.
And I saw one other question asking if these rates were the limit or was simply used as an example. The rates that are shown on the previous slide are the rates that were factored into the model mix. So those are the rates that are in the rate schedule for traditional, and that's how we build the budget. That is not a limit on the rate that can be paid on self-direction. That is something that happens through a separate process that I know that Livia can talk more about, but it is simply showing you the rate that was used to build the budget.
Thank you, Alina. And those are all of the questions that we have at this time, and I don't see any new hands raised.
Okay, I'm going to show you another model mix quickly. This model mix is for traditional community-only supports. Again, this model mix translates to or closely aligns with the self-directed community-only supports mix. That mix is applicable for individuals who choose to receive no supports in their home. So again, here you'll see the basic construction is the same. Support levels across the top, residential, discretionary, and planning budgets on the side. Because this individual or someone in this mix does not receive any in-home paid supports, there are not dollars added to their budget for that component. There are, however, a variety of discretionary services that are included. We see the rate applicable, as well as the number of hours within a year. Again, there's no component for residential, there's a total for discretionary, and then the planning budget. The planning budget on traditional is the same across all levels and all traditional mixes. It accounts for 12 hours per year for plan development and 54 hours per year for service coordination. As you can see in this side by side, the only difference between the budget on traditional and self-direction for community-only supports is the additional $1,296 that are added in self-direction to cover the cost of FEA. This slide provides you the full model mix for SD community-only supports at all levels, starting at level 1 and moving up to level B. The third mix that is applicable for folks who self-direct is the mix for individuals who use self-directed outside supports. That is based on the model mix for traditional supported living supports. Same basic construction. The one major difference here is that you see in this component for residential budget, the residential budget for this mix does vary by level. It varies by level because the amount of dollars and the specific per diem that is included in each level increases as support need increases. If you look at this model mix for the self-directed outside supports, as we discussed, you see the total value of the residential component for each level, but then there is a portion that is removed to cover some of the overhead costs specific to supported living providers. So on level 1, just over $8,000 was removed, which brings the total to $75,628. The other components for discretionary and planning are identical, with an additional $1,296 added for that FEA, and here are the range of budgets for individuals in the self-directed outside supports mix. I'm going to pause again for questions, but I'm going to leave it on this slide so that folks can take a look if they would like.
We have a couple of questions. How can a certified family home access the transportation funds? Do you have to become a transportation provider? Under self-direction, you don't have to become a transportation provider. A community support worker could provide transportation to community activities for participants. And Cindy, I don't know if you have anything else to add to that. If not, we'll go ahead and move on. Does the KW lawsuit have any effect on the budget amounts?
The KW lawsuit does not have a specific impact on the budget amounts in this model, although we will be talking in a few more minutes about some other things that do impact the budget amounts. So I'll have you pause, and if you have more questions about that, we'll address them in just a little bit.
And we do have a hand raised, Miranda. I don't know if you have a new question or if that was from before, but Deb, can you please unmute Miranda just in case she does have a new question?
There you go, Miranda.
Oh.
Oh, I'm good. I don't know what happened there. Sorry.
No problem. Thanks, Miranda.
And there is,
All right. We don't have any other questions at this time.
there is one more question there that I've just dropped in.
Okay. It appears that many people will see a significant budget cut with the new model. That suggests part of the justification is that many people have had higher budgets than they need. Is this an accurate assumption?
So I would say that the new budget model is intended to create greater comparability between traditional and self-direction. So as you can see that the model mixes for self-direction are based on traditional. In the analysis we've done thus far, that the individuals who are likely to see an initially assigned budget that looks lower than the budget they've had previously tend to be individuals who would receive that self-directed live-in support model. It is not anticipated or directed to reduce those people's support, but simply to align with the available support that's offered on traditional. Because the current traditional model limits the per diem for certified family home providers to $53.39 a day, that is the figure that is calculated into those budgets. Any individual who requires more support than their budget can afford or will allow for absolutely can and should request a budget modification in order to obtain additional hours of support. One of the things that is integral to this model is evaluation. So in order to identify if there is feasibility or a need to create different model mixes for self-direction that exist on traditional, is for us to do ongoing evaluation and to review exactly what people are requesting and how people are using their budgets during this initial implementation year. So if we find that folks do in fact need more than the model mix offers them, particularly those folks on self-direction, then the model mixes can be adjusted moving forward to better account for folks' need by support level.
Okay, thanks, Selena. No other questions at this time.
Okay.
Oh, we just, one moment. We just had somebody raise their hand. Deb, can you please unmute Margaret?
Go ahead, Margaret.
Yeah. Um, well, I'm kind of flustered here. All right. Discretionary budget. Looking at discretionary budget. Who can provide that? I mean, can we pick who we want to use to provide the, can it be family members providing those different areas in the discretionary budget and friends and without, you know, involving them in a whole lot of paperwork?
So on self-direction, folks have the flexibility to use that budget however they see fit. So it really will look very similar to how you build your SSP today, with identifying who are the community support workers you would like to utilize,
Okay.
support someone's plan. Those components are really just the way we got to the budget. So the self-directed budgets are based on the traditional budgets, but in self-direction, there's a lot more flexibility to use those dollars no matter what component they originated from.
So we're able to use family and friends for those different categories for the discretionary services.
Cindy, could you speak to the requirements for CSWs as they exist today on self-direction? Because there's no change to that as we move to the new model.
Hi, Cindy.
Right. Hi, Margaret. How are you? So I think what you're asking is, can you continue to have family and friends on the plan as your community support workers? Am I correct with that?
Okay, yeah.
That's your question?
Actually, providing this, what is it called? Discretionary, the different discretionary categories. That seemed to be a big amount, yeah, of hours, larger amount of hours, right?
So the residential and discretionary hours are combined into one budget amount for you to work with and to assign your CSWs to.
Okay, we just do the CFW, right? Okay.
Yep. It's the same as you've been doing the previous plan years.
I understand. Okay, so we're kind of going backwards a little bit, but we can do the budget modification. We like the budget modification, and we can work on that and do the magic. All right.
Exactly.
Thank you, Cindy and Deborah.
Thank you, Margaret. All right, we have an additional question. I have been looking for outside CSW workers to supplement mom and dad without any luck because of the required training and low hourly rate. Has this been addressed?
So Livia, you may be able to speak to this better than I. We have heard other feedback that of course, the term has lost me at this moment, but the rate, which is the comparison point for the rate you can pay your CSWs, is being evaluated.
Fair market rate?
Thank you. Whew, I just lost the words, Livia. The fair market rate that's currently in play is something the department's currently looking at, because they have heard that feedback that the top rate that's available is too low in order to be able to secure CSWs in this market. And, as the cost of other kinds of jobs are available. So that's something the department is looking at. There's been no change as of yet, but it is something the department is looking at as we understand folks are having a hard time finding CSWs as well as direct support professionals on the traditional side.
That is correct. We are looking at the fair market rate. In the meantime, though, you could still submit plans that are over the fair market rate as long as there's justification for that rate increase, and we will review those on a case-by-case basis. We have another question. Are the support codes used for services on the SSP changing to align with the service mixes or remaining the same for self-direction? The service categories are remaining the same. We are not changing them.
All right.
And those are all of the questions that we have at this time, and I don't see any new hands raised.
Well, the next thing we're going to talk about is those budget modifications. So as I already described, folks can get additional dollars to pay for supports on top of the assigned budget by identifying a desire to use those health, safety, or employment services, which are allowed for outside of the budget by just meeting the service-specific criteria, or by identifying a need for more residential or discretionary services for a health or a safety reason. So the department has identified 3 of the areas of service on self-direction as falling into the health, safety, or employment services category. That is job support services, adaptive equipment, and specialized nursing services. In every budget notice, participants will receive this attachment, which is a part of attachment 4, which details exactly what designated health and safety services are and what designated employment services are, and the specific service criteria you must meet in order to use that service. So any individual who needs to receive nursing services as a part of their support needs would simply need to provide a referral for those nursing services and submit that with their plan to get those nursing services added to the plan, but it would not be deducted from their budget dollars. An individual could add adaptive equipment to their plan by demonstrating a need that the items are of a direct or remedial benefit to the participant and are medically necessary. An individual could receive any job support services outside of their budget by submitting an employment plan and showing that that is for competitive integrated employment. So a job that's being paid at least minimum wage in an environment with individuals who do not also have intellectual disabilities exclusively. There's also that ability to request that budget modification. That's similar to the exception process that you guys are familiar with today. The health risk form and the safety risk form that you guys are already familiar with will still be utilized to request those budget modifications, and this will also be included in every budget notice moving forward. There's one other factor that folks should be aware of when it comes to the budgets with the new model, and that is the possible impact of the public health emergency and the American Rescue Plan on how folks' budgets will be implemented. Because of COVID-19, we are still under a federal public health emergency. We don't know when that's going to end. The federal government also provided states with extra money to provide supports and services due to the public health emergency. This was through the American Rescue Plan. CMS put in place special rules because of the public health emergency. They also said that states can only keep the money from the American Rescue Plan if they do certain things. As a result of all of these rules, the way we start to implement the new budget model is a little bit different than we initially anticipated. The Arp Rules say that a state cannot restrict the eligibility from services from what it was on April 1st of 2021. It also says that people must be able to keep getting the amount and type of services that they could get on April 1st, 2021, and that provider rates cannot go lower than they were on that date. This is the issue that the department is still figuring out with CMS and still confirming exactly how we can make sure we meet all of those requirements. For now, the department identifies that it means a few things. The first is that everyone who is eligible for the program right now is going to stay eligible while these requirements are in place. The second is that any new applicants who are found ineligible using the new tool will have a chance to be assessed by the SIB-R to see if they would have met the requirements as they were in place on April 1st of last year. The third piece is that participants will continue having access to their current budget until all of those American Rescue Plan requirements have been met. That is anticipated to be done in March of 2024, but that date could change. So what that means is that annual budget notices are going to need to include both the budget that was determined using the new model, so the ones we just showed you a bit ago, and the highest budget that someone had between April 1st, 2021 and the date we implement the new model. What that means is that for most participants, you will have access to both the new budget amount or the KW budget, because the highest budget that most people were assigned since April 1st, 2021 is equivalent to their KW budget. This is an excerpt from the draft notices. It shows your advisory budget for the upcoming plan year is X amount. This is where we would enter the budget calculated or decided with the new model. We then will have a line that shows you what your ARP budget is. Again, this is the highest budget you had from April 1st, 2021 until we implement the new model. Participants will have the higher of those two amounts. So, therefore, your assigned budget for the upcoming plan year is, and it would either be the advisory budget, if that's the higher amount, or the ARP budget, if that's the higher amount. That means that as we implement the new model, folks will not necessarily be limited to the advisory budget if that's lower than the budget they currently have, but will still be able to access the other budget while the ARP requirements are in place. What this means is that the department will be able to do the evaluation of the new model, see how things are working in the new model, and if necessary, can change the model mixes ahead of when those are the only budgets in place. This allows for participants to see how the new model works, see how well the model mix will meet their needs, while also having available the budgets they have now if they need them. Any questions before we continue on?
I see one, two, let's see.
So one question asks, if a participant needs an LPN or an RN to provide 8 to 16 hours daily, those care hours will not be included in the budget. Those services do not need to come out of the budget. That you would request those services on the plan with the documentation showing why you need that level of nursing support, and then dollars to cover that amount of support if it's being paid for with your adult program services would then be added. Anything you would add to that, Cindy or Olivia?
Yeah, so when talking about skilled nursing services, that's nursing oversight. If you're referring to a CSW who has an LPN or an RN license that is being accessed to get a higher rate as a CSW, those daily supports would still come out of the residential and discretionary budget.
Thank you for that clarification, Cindy. And the next question is, what if someone was under 18 on April 1st, 2021, and their budget was $14,900 under Family Direct, but their budget for this year is $79,000? So for the purposes of meeting the ARP requirements, the department is configuring that on the basis of the highest budget someone had from April 1st, 2021 through the implementation date of the new model. So if the new model were to implement on June 15th, and that individual had a budget on June 15th of $79,000, then the $79,000 would be their ARP budget.
We have another question. So the budget will be raised to reflect the nurse's standard wage like the current plan? So I can answer that. So if you are requesting that a CSW with qualifications equivalent to a nurse have a higher wage for that qualification, then you can increase that rate. You can put that on the plan at the higher rate with that justification, so long as the participant's needs reflect the need for that level of nursing care. And I'm not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
Okay.
Oh, I see a couple of hands raised, but I don't know if they are from the previous questions.
I
I
think
see a hand raised from Margaret. Okay.
Okay. So far, we've talked about the new assessments and how the assessments are used to determine someone's eligibility, both for the program and for the waiver. We've talked about the new assessment that's used to help get to somebody's support level. We've talked about how service mixes are decided, and then how a support level and a service mix come together to get to someone's budget using a model mix. We've also talked about the different kinds of budget modifications, so those services you can get outside of the budget, as well as more traditional budget modifications due to health or safety. And we've talked about the additional budget that some folks will get as a result of the ARP requirements. So the next step is for folks to develop their plan and then to get services. So plans are going to be developed a little bit differently to align with the new budget model and to align with the new home and community-based services settings rule. The plan developer will work with you to determine exactly what services you want and how that may look different than what you receive today. The department will be having a different training specifically on the changes to the support and spending plan, which will be scheduled shortly, to walk through some differences and how that plan looks from the one you may be familiar with today. But just so you know, be on the lookout for that additional training specific to the changes to the support and spending plan forms. The next piece we want to talk about is something that is a little bit different as we move into the new model, which is what happens when you need to make changes during your plan year. So right now, if you would like to make a change to your SSP, you can do so at any point during the plan year without having to get a whole new plan. However, moving forward, there are going to be some circumstances where your plan developer will need to help you build a new plan in the middle of the year. That will be called a mid-year plan. The three circumstances where somebody may need to do that is those circumstances where someone gets a new support level or a new service mix during the year. One reason that could happen is a change in condition. Another is someone requesting the verification review process at a time other than their assessment. And the third is just a desire for it to change your service mix. We're going to talk about all three of those in a little more detail in a moment. The thing to know is that if you were to receive a new budget notice during your typical plan year, because your level has changed or your service mix has changed, that will require you to develop a new plan. That new plan will be prorated, so will be for less than 12 months, and your recertification date and your assessment dates will not change as a result. The plan developer is typically your support broker on self-direction. Correct me if I'm wrong about that, Cindy. And if you simply want to change the way that you're using the dollars available to you, so maybe you want to get less learning support and instead get more emotional support, or you'd like to change the CSWs who are working with you, you can still make all of those changes without having to write a whole new plan. The mid-year plan changes are limited to when your level changes or your service mix changes. So let's talk about the first of those circumstances, and that is a change in condition. You can request a new assessment if there has been a major change in your support needs and the most recent assessment is no longer accurate for you. Your plan developer or support broker will complete the change in condition request form explaining what has changed. Liberty will then review that request and see if it warrants getting a new assessment. If it does warrant getting a new assessment, they will contact you to schedule a time to complete a Sysa and a Vineland 3. This is a sample of the change in condition request form. Along the top, you provide the information for the participant and the guardian if applicable. You then describe the condition that has changed for the participant. You also describe on the form how the current assessment does not reflect the current status of the participant and any forms that you're submitting or documentation you're submitting to show the need for a change in condition. After the new assessment has been completed, Liberty will send out a new budget notice. If you have a new support level, then you will need to create a new plan, a mid-year plan, with the help of your support broker and your team. However, if you get a new assessment and your support level stays the same, then you won't need to create a new plan because your level has not changed. If you have a change in condition before the time of your first Vineland 3 and Sysa, you will be assessed using those tools and you will move into the new budget model earlier than initially expected. So if you normally get your assessment in January, but in October, your needs change quite a bit and you need to go ahead and get a new assessment so that that assessment reflects your needs, and you submit the change in condition request, that is approved, and you will get an assessment, then in October, you will get that new Vineland 3 and Sysa versus waiting until your typical date of January before you would roll into the new model. Another reason why you may need a mid-year plan is a service mix change. If you want to change the way that you get your services, then you'll submit a service mix change request. This could be deciding that you want to start getting services using traditional instead of self-direction, or deciding that you want to stop getting services from someone who lives in your home, but instead want to employ community support workers who live outside of your home for your in-home supports. If you've already had a Sysa, then this service mix change can be done using just a file review. If you haven't had a Sysa yet, you'll need to be scheduled for a full assessment. Liberty will complete the assessment and then send you a new budget notice, and then you'll work with your team to develop a new plan. This is the new service mix change request form. Again, just contact information across the top. You'll need to indicate whether or not you've had a Sysa yet, identify your currently assigned service mix, and then what service mix you're requesting. We know that the concept of a service mix is pretty new, so it may not be automatically obvious what service mix applies. But if you currently use self-direction, you can identify which one applies by asking yourself, do I receive any in-home habilitative supports? If I do, then I know it's not community only. Do I get those supports from somebody I live with? If yes, then SD live-in supports is my current service mix. Do I get those in-home habilitation supports from somebody who doesn't live in my home? Then SD outside supports is the applicable mix. The individual and their guardian then sign, and then the form is submitted to the information coordinator at the Bureau. The last type of mid-year plan that can happen is the result of an off-cycle verification request. So people are allowed to ask for verification at any time, but it really is best to ask for that verification at the time of your assessment. If you are making the request to get a verification because your needs have changed, then what you really will need to request is a change in condition, not a verification request. If your needs have not changed, but you've decided a few months down the road that you actually would like to go through verification, even though you declined at the time of your assessment, then you can make that request. Liberty will send a notice asking you to send in supporting documentation and the verification questionnaire. If the verification review team finds that you meet the criteria for level M and B, then you'll get a new notice and will need to prepare a new plan. If the verification review team shows that you don't meet the criteria for level M or B, you'll also get a notice explaining their decision, but you can keep your current plan because your support level will not change. Just like is the case right now, individuals can always appeal decisions from the department. Every budget notice you receive that where you have an appeal right will include information about how to appeal that decision. Here's a list of contacts that I'm not going to go through with any detail. Just note that that is available for you, as well as some resources. Again, these slides will be made available after this training on the My Choice Matters website. And just a notice letting folks know that there are other My Choice Matters discussion sessions that will be available in the coming months where you can get specific information about other topics. That includes some more detail around the new assessments, more detail around the new notices, understanding more the impacts of the ARP budget. We will also be adding additional sessions, including those on the new plan forms. Each of these trainings are intended to be just 1 hour long and will be available to all participants. This list of sessions is also available on the My Choice Matters website. With that, we will use our last few minutes together to answer questions.
We do have a few questions that came in. Who is the support broker? The providers relation department? So the support broker is whoever the participant chooses to write their plan and direct their services throughout the plan year and assist them with plan development. I'm not sure if I'm missing a piece of that question, so feel free to type in any additional questions you have around that if I'm missing that. Another question, apologies if you've covered this already, but how long do the new assessments take to complete?
So at last count, I believe the new assessments were taking approximately 4 hours. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. We know that is longer than previous assessments were taking. The hope is that as time goes on, we'll be able to sort of shorten that time a little bit. That having to complete 2 assessments versus 1 does take a little bit longer than the SIBR has historically taken.
It looks like we've got a question that's come in related to the original support broker question. It says, or the care coordinator. I'm not sure what reference the care coordinator is. There's a service coordinator under the traditional program and a support broker under the self-direct program. They're in essence the equivalent of each other. Can we unmute Mary Jane to see if I think I'm missing the question there.
Sure. As soon as I find her, there she is. Go ahead.
I'm a broker, and she does have a Blue Cross coordinator, so we both are actually brokers for our client, right? Both of us actually just have different functions, but we both that plan.
I missed your first sentence. So the information coordinator for MMCP for Blue Cross, is that what you're referring to?
Right.
Okay,
So
and what was your question about this?
I understood what you said, so you did answer my question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. And I see another question. As this counts as certified family home training, how do we document that we attended this meeting?
So in previous sessions, I believe that this is still accurate. Michael Chase has identified that you simply need to, document that you attended this training, the date of the training, and the length of the training, and that the list of attendees for all of these trainings that might be applicable to certified family home providers are being forwarded on to licensing and certification, so that they will have a list and will be able to check and see that you were in the attendance list on the date that you indicated. So just documenting it on whatever form it is you submit to licensing and certification will be sufficient, as these attendee lists are going over there for their documentation.
During the assessments, do all persons that you are requiring to be there need to be there for the entire time?
It is required that there are 2 respondents in addition to the person receiving services for the entirety of the Sysa assessment. That is a requirement from the developers of that tool. So it's 2 respondents in addition to the individual. Now, if the participant receiving supports wants to also act as a respondent to the assessment, they are welcome to do so. And they are not required to be there the entire time if they identify that that is not in their best interest. But there must be 2 respondents, and respondents should be there the whole time.
I am not seeing any other questions or hands raised.
I'll note for folks, I did put into the chat the link for the survey on this training. You can feel free to follow that link. It's a very short 2-question survey, just asking what additional information would be helpful about the new model and how we can improve this training. And we would love your feedback as we want to really make sure that we're getting people the information that they need. I'm not seeing any additional questions, and we are at the hour. I want to be respectful of everyone's time today. Thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate it. Do be on the lookout for the My Choice Matters website for additional updates and information, as well as that list of other trainings that are available.